ونجيته ومن آمن معه من الهلكة برحمتك. وبعض اتخذته لنفسك خليلا وسألك لسان صدق في الآخرين فأعجبته وجعلت ذلك عليا. وبعض كلمته من شجرة تكليما وجعلت له من أخيه ردءا ووزيرا. وبعض أولدته من غير أب وآتيته البينات أيدته بروح القدس. وكل شرعت له شريعة ونهجت له منهاجا وتخيرت له أوصياء مستحفظا بعد مستحفظ من مدة إلى مدة إقامة لدينك وحجة على عبادك ولئلا يزول الحق عن مقره ويغلب الباطل على أهله ولا يكون أحد لولا أرسلت إلينا رسولا منذرا وأقمت لنا علما هاديا فنتبع آيتك من قبل أن نضل ونخسى إلى أن انتهيت بالأمر إلى حبيبك ونجيبك محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. فكان كما أنتجبته سيد من خلقته وسفوة من استفيته وأفضل من اجتبيته وأكرم من اعتمدته قدمته على أنبيائك وبعثته إلى الثقلين من عبادك وأودعته مشارقك ومغاربك وسخرت له البراق وأرجت بروحه إلى السماء وأودعته علم ما كان وما يكون إلى انقضاء خلقك. ثم نصرته بالرعب وهففته بجبرائيل وميكائيل والمسومين من ملائكتك ووعدته أن تظهر دينه على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون وذلك بعد أن بوعته مبوأ صدق من أهله وجعلت له ولهم أول بيت وضع للناس الذي ببكة مباركة وهدى للعالمين فيه آيات بينات مقام إبراهيم ومن دخله كان آمنا. وقلت إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا. ثم جعلت أجر محمد صلواتك عليه وآله مودتهم في كتابك فقلت كن لا أسألكم عليه أجرا إلا المودة في القربى وقلت ما سألتكم من أجر فهو لكم وقلت ما أسألكم عليه من أجر إلا من شاء أن يتخذ إلى ربه سبيلا فكانوا هم السبيل إليك والمسلك إلى رضوانك. فلما انقضت أيامه أقام وليه علي بن أبي طالب صلواتك عليهما وآلهما هاديا إذ كان هو المنذر ولكل قوم هاد. وقال والملأ أمامه من كنت مولاه فعلي مولاه اللهم وال من والاه وعاد من عاداه وانصر من نصره واخذل من خذله. وقال من كنت أنا نبيه فعلي أميره وقال أنا وأني من شجرة واحدة وسائر الناس من شجر شتى. وأحله محل هارون من موسى فقال له أنت مني بمنزلة هارون من موسى إلا أنه لا نبي بعدي. وزوجه ابنته سيدة النساء العالمين وأحل له من مسجده ما حل له وسد الأبواب إلا بابه ثم أودعه علمه وحكمته وقال أنا مدينة العلم والي بابها فمن أراد المدينة والحكمة فليأتها من بابها. ثم قال أنت أخي ووسي ووارثي لحمك من لحمي ودمك من دمي وسلمك سلمي وحرمك حرمي والإيمان مخالة لحمك ودمك كما خالت لحمي ودمي وأنت غدا على الحوض خليفتي وأنت تقضي ديني وتنجز عداتي وشيعتك على منابر من نور مبيضة وجوههم حولي في الجنة وهم جيراني ولولا أنت يا علي لم يعرف المؤمنون بعدي. وكان بعده هدى من الضلال ونورا من العمى وحبل الله المتين وصراطه المستقيم لا يسبق بقرابة في رحم ولا بسابقة في الدين ولا يلحق في منقبة من مناقبه يحذو حظ الرسول صلى الله عليهما وآلهما ويقاتل على التأويل ولا تأخذه في الله لومة لائم قد وتر فيه سناديد العرب وقتل أبطالهم وناوش ضعبانهم فأودع قلوبهم أحقادا بدرية وخيبرية وهنينية وغيرهن فضبت على عداوته وأكبت على منابذته حتى قتل الناكثين والقاسطين والمارقين. ولما قضى نحبه وقتله أشكى الآخرين يتبع أشكى الأولين، ثم لم يمتثل أمر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله في الهادين بعد الهادين، والأمة مصرة على مقته مجتمعة على قطيعة رحمه وإقصاء ولده إلا القليل ممن وفى لرعاية الحق فيهم، فقتل من قتل وسبي من سبي وأقصي من أقصي، وجرى القضاء لهم بما يرجى له حسن المثوبة، إذ كانت الأرض لله يورثها من يشاء من عباده والعاقبة للمتقين. وسبحان ربنا إن كان وعد ربنا لمفعولا، ولن يخلف الله وعده وهو العزيز الحكيم. فعلى العطائب من أهل محمد وعلي صلى الله عليهما وآلهما فليبكي الباكون، وإياهم فليندب النادبون، ولمثلهم فلتذر في الدموع، وليصرخ الصارخون ويضج الضاجون ويعج العاجون. أين الحسن وأين الحسين؟ أين أبناء الحسين؟ صالحان بعد الصالح وصادق بعد الصادق. أين السبيل بعد السبيل؟ أين الخيرة بعد الخيرة؟ أين الشموس طالعة وأين أقمار منيرة؟ أين أنجم الزاهرة؟ أين علام الدين وقواعد العلم؟ أين بقية الله التي لا تخلو من العترة الحادية؟ أين المعد لقطع دابر الظلمة؟ أين المنتظر لإقامة الأمت والعوج؟ أين المرتجى لإزالة الجور والعدوان؟ أين المدخر لتجديد الفرائض والسنن؟ أين المتخير لإعادة الملة والشريعة؟ أين مؤمل لإحياء الكتاب وحدوده؟ أين محيي معالم الدين وأهله؟ أين قاسم شوكة المعتدين؟ أين هادم أبنية الشرك والنفاق؟ أين المبيد أهل الفسوق والإسيان والطغيان؟ أين حاسد فروع الغي والشقاق؟ أين طامس آثار الزيغ والأهواء؟ أين قاتئ حبائل الكذب والافتراء؟ أين المبيد العتاة والمرضى؟ أين المستأصل الأهل العناد والتضليل والإلحاد؟ أين المعز الأولياء ومضل الأعداء؟ أين جامع الكلمة على التقوى؟ أين باب الله الذي منه يؤتى؟ أين وجه الله الذي إليه يتوجه الأولياء؟ أين السبب المتصل بين الأرض والسماء؟ أين صاحب يوم الفتح وناشر الراية الهدى؟ أين مؤلف شمل الصلاح والرضا؟ أين طالب بذول الأنبياء وأبناء الأنبياء؟ أين طالب بدم المقتول بكربلاء؟ أين المنصور على من اعتدى عليه وافترى؟ أين المضطر الذي يجاب إذا دعا؟ أين صدر الخلائق ذو البر والتقوى؟ أين ابن النبي المصطفى وابن علي المرتضى وابن خديجة الغراء وابن فاطمة الكبرى؟ بأبي أنت وأمي ونفسي لك الوقاء والحمى، يا ابن السادة المقربين، يا ابن النجباء الأكرمين، يا ابن الهداة المهديين، يا ابن الخيرة المحذبين، يا ابن الخطارفة الأنجبين، يا ابن الأطايب المطهرين، يا ابن الخضارمة المنتجبين، يا ابن القماقمة الأكرمين، يا ابن البدور المنيرة، يا ابن السرج المضيعة، يا ابن الشهب الثاكبة، يا ابن الأنجم الزاهرة، يا ابن السبل الواضحة، يا ابن الأعلام اللائحة، يا ابن العلوم الكاملة، يا ابن السنن المشهورة، يا ابن المعالم الماثورة، يا ابن المعجزات الموجودة، يا ابن الدلائل المشهودة، يا ابن الصراط المستقيم، يا ابن النبأ العظيم، يا ابن من هو في الكتاب لدى الله علي حكيم، يا ابن الآيات والبينات، يا ابن الدلائل الظاهرات، يا ابن البراهين الواضحات الباهرات، يا ابن الحجج البالغات، يا ابن النعم السابغات، يا ابن داها والمحكمات، يا ابن ياسين والذاريات، يا ابن تور والعاديات، يا ابن من دنا فتدلى فكان قاب قوسين أو أدنى دنوا واقترابا من العلي الأعلى، ليت شعري أين استقرت بك النوى، بل أي أرض تقلك أو ثرى، أبي رضوى أو غيرها أم ذي توى. عزيز علي أن أرى الخلق ولا ترى، ولا أسمع لك حسيسا ولا نجوى. عزيز علي أن تحيط بك دوني البلوى، ولا ينالك مني ضجيج ولا شكوى. بنفسي أنت من مغيب لم يخلو منا، بنفسي أنت من نازل ما نزع عنا. بنفسي أنت أمنية الشائق يتمنى من مؤمن ومؤمنة ذكر فعنا. بنفسي أنت من عقيد عز لا يسامى، بنفسي أنت من أثير مجد لا يجارى. بنفسي أنت من تلاد نعم لا تضاهى، بنفسي أنت من نسيف شرف لا يساوى. إلى متى أحار فيك يا مولاي، وإلى متى، وأي خطاب أسف فيك وأي نجوى. عزيز علي أن أجاب دونك وأناغى، عزيز علي أن أبكيك ويقبلك الورى. عزيز علي أن يجري عليك دونهم ما جرى. هل من معين فأطيل معه العويل والبكاء، هل من جزوء فأساعد جزعه إذا خلا. هل قضيت عين فساعدتها عيني على القضاء، هل إليك يا ابن أحمد سبيل فتلقى. هل يتصل يومنا منك بعدة فنحظى، متى نرد مناهلك الروية فنروى. متى ننتقئ من عذب مائك فقد طال الصدى، متى نغاديك ونراوحك فنقر عينا. متى ترانا ونراك وقد نشرت اللواء النصر، ترانا نعف بك وأنت تؤم الملأ، وقد ملأت الأرض عدلا وأذقت أعداءك هوانا وعقابا. وأبرت الأتاة وجعلت الحق، وقطعت دابر المتكبرين، واجتثثت رسول الظالمين. ونحن نقول الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم أنت كشاف الكرب والبلوى، وإليك أستعدي فعندك العدوى. وأنت رب الآخرة ودنيا، فأغث يا غياث المستغيثين عبيدك المبتلى، وأره سيده يا شديد القوى. واعزل عنه به العسى والجوى، وبرد غليله يا من على العرش استوى، ومن إليه الرجع والمنتهى. اللهم ونحن عبيدك التائقون إلى وليك المذكر بك وبنبيك، خلقته لنا عصمة وملاذا، وأقمته لنا قواما ومآذا، وجعلته للمؤمنين منا إماما. فبلغه منا تحية والسلاما، وزدنا بذلك يا رب إكراما. واجعل مستقره لنا مستقرا ومقاما، واتمم نعمتك بتقديمك إياه أمامنا، حتى توردنا جنانك ومرافقة الشهداء من خلصائك. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد، وصل على محمد جده ورسولك السيد الأكبر، وعلى أبيه سيد الأصغر، وجدته الصديقة الكبرى فاطمة بنت محمد صلى الله عليه وآله، وعلى من استبيت من آبائه البررة، وعليه أفضل وأكمل وأتم وأدوم وأكثر وأوفر ما صليت على أحد من أسفيائك وخيرتك من خلقك. وصل عليه صلاة لا غاية لعددها ولا نهاية لمددها ولا نفاذ لأمدها. اللهم واقم به الحق وادحض به الباطل، وعدل به أولياءك واضلل به أعداءك. وصل اللهم بيننا وبينهم وصلة تعدي إلى مرافقة السلفه، واجعلنا ممن يأخذ في حجتهم ويمكث في ذلهم. وأعنا على تعدية حقوقه إليه والاجتهاد في طاعته، واجتناب بمعصيته، وامن علينا برضاه. وهب لنا رأفته ونعمته ودعاءه وخيره، ما ننال به سعة من رحمتك وفوزا عندك. واجعل صلاتنا به مقبولة، وذنوبنا به مغفورة، ودعاءنا به مستجابة. واجعل أرزاقنا به مبسوطة، وهمومنا به مكفية، وحوائجنا به مقضية. واقبل إلينا بوجهك الكريم، واقبل تقربنا إليك، وانظر إلينا نظرة رحيمة نستكمل بها الكرامة عندك. ثم لا تصرفها عنا بجودك، واسقنا من عوض جده صلى الله عليه وآله بكأسه وبيده، ريان رويا هنيا سائغا لا ظمأ بعده، يا أرحم الراحمين. والمستحبات is 2 ركعات. الصلاة for قضاء الحاجة، دعاء ندبك وبدن الله. الله سلام.
لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. توكلت على الحي الذي لا يموت، والحمد لله الذي لم يتخذ صاحبة ولا ولدا، ولم يكن له شريك في الملك، ولم يكن له ولي من الذل، وكبره تكبيرا. الله أكبر، الله أكبر، الله أكبر، الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله جل جلاله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله جل جلاله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد. أشهد أن مولانا أمير المؤمنين عليا ولي الله صلوات الله وسلامه. أشهد أن مولانا أمير المؤمنين عليا حجة الله صلوات الله وسلامه. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وسلم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد، اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. Amma ba'd. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Congratulations to you all on today, the day of Friday, the day of Eid for the Mu'mineen, a day in which we take the time to study and learn lessons from the Holy Quran as we continue our discussion around the tafsir of Surah Al-Mudaththir. We've reached the discussion where we ended last week on the 35th verse, where Allah was saying, "Innaha le'ehdal kubar," that certainly it is one of the great signs, or one of the great items. And we mentioned that some of the interpretations of this great Ihdal Kubar refers to either, for example, the hell, because we're discussing the fire of hell and Saqar. It could be the 19 angels that we mentioned in the previous verses that we're talking about, that these 19 angels, Ihdal Kubar, that they are from amongst the great signs or from the great statuses that Allah has dictated for this day. It's also a possibility that the Quran is referenced in this by Ihda al-Kubar, is this Quran that is warning, is one of the great items that Allah has revealed, or it's possibility that our Holy Prophet is being referred to as Ihda al-Kubar. Nadhiran lil bashar. The 36th verse, in it, Allah makes a statement in a description of Ihda al-Kubar, that this is one of the great signs of God, or one of the great items, which is also nadhiran lil bashar, and a warning for all humans. When this 36th verse came in, a discussion comes amongst the Mufassirin that what is it that Allah is referring to as Ihda al-Kubar, nadhirun lil bashar. The reason that this becomes important as a discussion is that if it is referencing, for example, the fire of hell, that the fire of hell is a warning for the people and all of the human beings, but the fire is not something that's visible, it's a consequence that hasn't been seen yet. Others who made the statement that it's the angels come out and say, well, the angels again are something that is not seen, and how can it be a warning if you haven't seen the warning yet? It could be that the description, and in case if it's the description that's the warning, then the actual warning is the Quran. So here we see that the Mufassirin separate their opinions. For example, Al-Hasan, who is one of the Mufassir of the Quran, continues to mention that this is a description of the fire of hell. Ibn Zayd sees it as referring to the Prophet Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Because earlier in this surah, Allah is coming forward and telling our Prophet, remember in the beginning of the surah, Allah says, Qum fandur, stand and then give a warning to the people, that Prophet who is giving the warning, he is nadhirun lil bashar, that he is the one who warns for the Prophet, warns for people. And Ibn Ruzayn, another of the Mufassirin, suggests it could describe Allah himself as the source of the warning and the source of all of this guidance. So the discussion around the depth of the meaning of these two verses, of where it's pointing to, is an interesting debate and discussion that points to what does Allah intend as the warning to humanity. Is it the essence of Allah himself who is a warning? Is it the Quran? Is it the Prophet? Or is it the description of these punishments and difficulties that will befall humanity? In the 37th verse, Allah continues this conversation with a very interesting point. لِمَنْ شَاءَ مِنْكُمْ أَنْ يَتَقَدَّمَ أَوْ يَتَأَخَّرَ, so that whoever amongst you wishes may advance ahead, and those who would remain behind. This is a reaction to the warning. And the reaction to the warning, nadhirun lil bashar, that a warner is presented, and whoever desires can come forward or turn back. This description and indicates the warning is directed toward those who have the choice to obey God and advance towards Him, or disobey God and stay behind. The verse emphasizes the human will and agency, opposing and disagreeing with the concept of predestination. That should the concept of predestination be the fundamental of humanity, then why would Allah say that you have the choice to move forward or to move back? An interesting discussion on this verse also points to and says that Allah describes faith and obedience as advancing, because a person who practices faith and obedience is considered to be advancing in intellect and advancing in status. And at the same point in time, disbelief and disobedience are described as retreating, because the person who regresses in both is regressing in intellect and regressing in rank in front of Allah. This discussion of pointing to what does Allah mean by يَتَقَدَّمَ أَوْ يَتَأَخَّرَ, move forward or move back. That someone who is warned will either move forward in the direction of Allah, meaning he will submit to his intellect to say that the warning has worked for me, and if my intellect is working and I'm adhering the warning, I'm moving forward towards Allah. Or the second argument, man yata'akhkhar, the one who turns back and steps away from Allah, means that he has not applied his intellect to the warning, and therefore now he is heading backwards from that warning, and therefore intellect is regressing as well as status is regressing. What's interesting is this particular verse doesn't specify what you're moving towards or what you're moving away from. It simply says, لِمَنْ شَاءَ, whoever desires minkum, أَنْ يَتَقَدَّمَ أَوْ يَتَأَخَّرَ. Whoever amongst you decides can either move forward or move back. Which is why one of the most comprehensive explanations of this verse comes from our sixth Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi salam, who specifies and explains to say that this moving forward and moving backwards is relative to the decision that you make. Our Imam explains and he says, whoever advances towards our guardianship and wilayah of Ahlul Bayt retreats away from the saqar. So moving forward is if one who has wilayah is moving towards Allah and moving away from the fire simultaneously, an and ma. And at the same point in time, the argument is made that everyone who retreats from our guardianship and away from the path of Ahlul Bayt is moving away from the Ahlul Bayt and towards the fire of hell. So the context the Imam provides is that this moving forward and backwards is not only absolute to say that, oh, you're either moving forward or backwards, but rather you're doing both simultaneously. You're either moving towards Allah and away from the fire of hell simultaneously, or you're moving towards the fire of hell and away from the guidance of Allah at the same time. This discussion about talking about and saying that Allah is saying liman sha'a, whoever wants, minkum an yatakaddama aw yata'akhkhar, whoever amongst you desires can move forward or move backwards, away from guidance, away from the fire of hell, or towards guidance or towards the fire of hell, is a discussion to say that man has free will and the right to make a decision about his own life. Now, if you understand that this verse explaining free will and giving the right that you will choose, do you go to hell, do you go to heaven? When we put it together with verse number 30, if you remember in the 30th verse, there was a part of that verse, that was the longest verse in Surah Al-Mudaththir. A part of it, Allah made the statement, وَلِيَقُولَ الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِم مَرَضٌ وَالْكَافِرُونَ مَاذَا أَرَادَ اللَّهُ بِهَذَا الْمَثَلِ كَذَلِكَ يُذِلُّ اللَّهُ مَن يَشَاءُ وَيَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ. Verse number 30 had a piece in it that made it seem like Allah controls if we're guided or if we're lost. It gave us the example where Allah says, I gave an example, and those who have a sickness in their heart or are disbelievers look at the signs of Allah and say, what does Allah mean by this? And therefore Allah guides who He chooses and He leads astray who He chooses. That 30th verse where Allah made the statement that He guides who He chooses and He leads astray who He chooses created an implication in the minds of some of us to say that Allah decides if you're going to heaven or hell. But when we put context to the verses that we're discussing, Allah in the one element is saying that I give you the freedom to make the decision you want, and on the other side He's saying I guide who I choose and I lead astray who I choose. If we take the verse in the middle of these verses that talks about the importance of the intellect, talks about the importance of using your brain, we understand that Allah gives some of us the tawfiq to purify and work with our intellect, and that is the concept of hidayah. And the one who is absent from the ability of developing his intellect is the one who Allah is describing, yudhillu bihi, that goes and is led astray by this action. When we put this together, we understand the concept of both free will, that I have the freedom and the choice, that I can use my intellect and I get closer to Allah, or I can ignore my intellect. But the ability to use my intellect is something that Allah supports in humanity and gives guidance towards. Which is why one of the greatest du'as that Allah has referenced for us that we should all take as a regular practice is Rabbi zidni ilma. Allah, increase in my knowledge. When you increase in my knowledge, you increase in my guidance. When you increase in my guidance, you make me amongst those who are paying attention to the nadhir and the warning you've given, and you're making me someone who avoids the punishment of hell and move towards goodness. So to simply say that Allah is the one who brings people to heaven and brings people to hell, no. There's a path by which He gives us the ability to listen to Him, and that's the use of our intellect. Which is why our responsibility as we study the Quran is to learn how do we balance between these statements. This particular verse is one that I do recommend that we keep in memory and keep as a discussion point for ourselves, the 37th verse. Because whenever someone comes forward to us and says, oh, Allah didn't give me the option, oh, I had no choice, whatever Allah made me is what I am. Here Allah is clearly telling you, لِمَنْ شَاءَ مِنْكُمْ أَنْ يَتَقَدَّمْ أَوْ يَتَأَخَّرْ, that you have the freedom and choice. And Allah has given us the ability to decide for ourselves, that either come towards Allah or to turn away from Allah. And He's not forcing us to this decision, but rather our own actions and our behavior is pushing us in that direction. The 38th verse continues discussion. كُلُّ نَفْسٍ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ رَهِينَ. This verse talks about Allah making the statement of the consequence of either adhering to or ignoring the warning that He has provided. That every soul, every nafs is hostage or held in pledge to what it has earned. That every soul will receive the reward or the punishment of the actions that it has performed. The use of language here is very important and very interesting, that changes the perspective of looking at why and how we live this life. Let me explain. Allah uses the word rahina. Rahina, that comes from the Arabic rahana, or pledge. A rahan is also, for example, collateral. What do you give in rahan? for an object that you wish to possess. Allah describes and says that every soul is held in pledge or in collateral for the actions of that it has performed or the actions it has earned. This discussion points to the reality and saying that human beings are given this life in a collateral of the reward that they choose to earn in the hereafter. We made an agreement that we intend to go to heaven and that we are created for heaven, but that we will only get into heaven if we fulfill our pledge in this life of fulfilling the obligation that we possessed. So meaning that every human being was created with the intention of going to heaven. But to get to that, we have to fulfill and replace the collateral that we gave or that we received, which is this life, to get into heaven. And whenever we complete the collateral of this life correctly, we will get back the trust that was promised to us. Meaning that one of the interesting things is our general belief and consensus is we were created, and after your creation, you can either go to heaven or go to hell. It's up to you. Here Allah is saying, no, actually you were created for heaven. And you made an agreement that you are created for heaven and you are going to heaven, but to get there, you have to simply fulfill your pledge of this life of doing what Allah commanded you. So to say that man is created, that he could go to heaven or go to hell, no, man is intended to go to heaven. This is why we see the traditions of Ahlul Bayt telling us, you were created for heaven, sell your soul for nothing less than that. This rahan, this collateral that we've taken on of this life to get into our property and return to our property, is our right to either fulfill it and achieve that goal and it return back to what was our commitment, or that we lose that commitment and we don't fulfill our pledge. Allah makes an interesting statement after this, illa, where He creates an exception, that every man is held in collateral for what he has earned, except ashab al-yameen, the people of the right. When Allah uses this kalima, ashab al-yameen, who are ashab al-yameen? What does this mean? And there are three different interpretations to this concept of what it means to be ashab al-yameen. Some of the mufassirin came forward and said that ashab al-yameen refers to the angels. Why? The angels never make a mistake against Allah. They have no collateral that they have to fulfill. They have no other obligation. They simply do what Allah commands them and they receive the mercy and grace of Allah from the beginning. The second interpretation is that there are those believers, ashab al-yameen, who have committed no sins whatsoever in their life. Meaning that someone who has never committed a sin is ashab al-yameen because there's nothing in collateral that they have to pay off. There's no sin that they've committed. There's no misdeeds that they've performed. So therefore there's no question for them that they have to be held accountable for. The third interpretation says ashab al-yameen refers to the believers who keep faith in Allah and who on the Day of Judgment will be given their book in their right hand. And what that means is that their good deeds exceed their misdeeds. That the collection of all of their a'mal leans more towards goodness than it does towards badness. The significance of this is to say that if we become ashab al-yameen on the Day of Judgment that are referenced in Surah Al-Waqi'ah and other parts of the Quran, that you're someone whose good deeds outweigh their bad deeds, that Allah is promising that if you go through this process of doing more good and less bad, I will forgive all of your bad. You will not be held accountable for the evil that you have committed, and you will receive a reward. Many of the mufassirin come to the conclusion that this is referring to ashab al-yameen because Allah, for example, in the Quran talks about some of the examples where Allah makes the statement, the good deeds remove the evil deeds. So meaning that even if I have evil deeds, if I have more good, the good will wash away the evil. One of the points of this, if it refers to ashab al-yameen, is a very hopeful verse to us. It's a very beneficial verse to us. That Allah is saying that if your evil exceeds the good, then I have to be adil with you, I have to be just with you, hold you accountable for everything. But Allah now is making an exception, except if your good deeds outweigh your evil, then I will choose to shower you with my mercy and not hold you accountable for the mistakes you've made. Which is why there is the discussion that says, as for him who will be given his record in his right hand, he shall receive an easy reckoning. When Allah makes this statement in the Quran, it's a believable interpretation to say that as long as you've done more good, Allah will not hold you account for every single mistake that you've made. It's a very hopeful verse. It's a very positive verse for us. And this is why, for example, one of the other statements that we see from the Ahlul Bayt, that we and our adherents are the people of the right hand. That those who follow the seerah and the education and the teaching of Ahlul Bayt, their good deeds will outweigh their mistakes and their shortcomings, and being the people of the right hand will be ashab al-yameen, will not be held accountable for every mistake that they've made. Allah now describes the condition of these people of the right hand. فِي جَنَّاتٍ يَتَسَاءَلُونَ. That these people of the right hand, they will be given entrance into heaven. And when they are in heaven and in the gardens of heaven, they will be the ones who are questioning anil mujrimin, of the guilty people. Ma salakakum fis saqar. What is it that drew you into this saqar, this bad part of hell? From here begins a conversation of saying, what are the big mistakes that a person makes that cause him to enter into the fire of hell? And inshallah next week we'll continue the discussion around what are those mistakes that we have to avoid to stay away from the fire of hell. But before we get to that conversation, the context of the discussion here is very interesting. One, that the people who are in heaven, they will have the ability to look at all of Allah's creation and to be able to communicate with people in Allah's creation. Which is why the people of heaven, they're in heaven. You're comfortable, you're good. But you can talk to the people in hell. And not just any hell, the people in Saqar. That hell that has 19 angels over them and is an incredibly painful position for the evil that they created. You can talk to them. You can have a communication. The second interesting thing is that when you see someone in hell, you'll want to ask them, what cast you into hell? So one of two things can this mean. Either one, the fact that the condition of the Day of Judgment is so extreme, as we've mentioned before, that every soul will be for itself, that you won't pay attention to anybody else. You won't care about what's happening to somebody next to you, around you, anywhere, until after the examination is over. And when you're in ease, and you look around and you say, hey, I'm missing so-and-so, or I don't see so-and-so, that you'll have the opportunity then to ask them, hey, why aren't you with me? Why did you wind up here? Or the other opportunity and the other discussion of this is that Allah on the Day of Judgment won't disclose the affairs of all people. Meaning you'll see people, but you won't know exactly what's going to happen to them. You won't know that, for example, was it enough that you received your book in your right hand? Was it enough that you were in the lines of shafa'ah? Was it enough that you had the correct faith? You won't know the consequences until all of the questioning is completed, and therefore don't take it lightly to say that just because I've attained one level of success, I have nothing to worry about. Paying attention to these points makes us always conscious and considerate of the fact that we need to pay attention to our deeds and our behavior. Never consider and take for granted that because I have attained one piece of hidayah, I have all of hidayah. I always have to work to improve myself and to be cautious and careful of the fact that I may cause such a mistake that takes me away from the path of guidance. Which is why when we describe a person who attains Allah's favor possesses a quality known as taqwa. Taqwa is a combination of fear and hope. Never assume that I'm good, I'm set. Because a person who receives Allah's mercy has hope in Allah's mercy as well as fear of His punishment. The most apt description that I've replaced and said many times, and I repeat again, is think of it this way. You go to a grocery store with your mom. You get distracted and your mom walks away. In that moment, you have two elements. You know your mom's not going to leave you in the grocery store, but you're also afraid that you've lost her. That sentiment is the fear and hope that we always have to have with Allah. That I am hopeful that Allah will guide me and help me, but I'm also fearful that I've invoked His punishment for the mistakes that I've made. And that is our goal to achieve in this life. We ask Allah by the right of the say, by the right of the hadirin ghaibin, that, oh Allah, forgive our sins and cover our flaws. Ya Allah, give us the tawfiq to learn the lessons from the Holy Quran and apply them in our lives. Oh Allah, keep us attached to the path of hidayah, the path of Ahlul Bayt, and the path of your mercy. Oh Allah, separate us from your anger, from your punishment, and from the sins that keep us away from your mercy. Ya Allah, increase in our intellect and our guidance, and keep our families on the upright path of Islam. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu s-salihat, wa tawasaw bil haqqi, wa tawasaw bis sabr. Sadaqallahu al-aliyyul azim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل وسلم على أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب وفاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين والحسن والحسين سيد شباب أهل الجنة وعلي بن الحسين زين العابدين ومحمد بن علي باقر علم النبيين وجعفر بن محمد الصادق وموسى بن جعفر الكاظم وعلي بن موسى الرضا ومحمد بن علي الجواد وعلي بن محمد الهادي والحسن بن علي الأسكري وحجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب العصر والزمان. اللهم صل على محمد عجل الله تعالى فرجه وسهل الله تعالى مخرجه وظهوره وجعلنا من أعوانك والأنصارك والمستشهدين بين يديك. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات. تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم صل على محمد. أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله. I enjoin upon you and myself to have fear and piety of Allah. Over the course of this past week, we've come to the realization of many horrible things that are going on in the world, and many continuing attacks that even including today involved over 6 to 10 airstrikes that killed many innocent civilians and were signs of open aggression and warfare that are being performed. There's a description that says as of yesterday, because as of today's figures those numbers are going to rise, that over 90,000 innocent people have been displaced by the initiation of a conflict across the past week, and over 500 people were killed in one day because of the acts of aggression. Our scholars have collectively given us instruction that we have to offer support to these people and we have to stand up for them and give them resources to help facilitate them through this difficulty. But one of the problems that we're facing that's unique to us over here is that we have politicians who want to prevent us from offering support. Namely and specifically, the Speaker of the House of Representatives in the US government, Mike Johnson, issued a statement on Twitter as well as filed for action with the IRS, demanding the IRS commissioner to revoke the tax-exempt status of organizations who have been offering assistance to these people in need. And the organizations that he's labeling, and he labels 8 organizations as part of his comments, include organizations like, for example, All for Global Justice, Islamic Relief, which is one of the largest Muslim non-profit organizations in this country, United Hands in Relief, and Tides Community, and other organizations that do actual good work and help a lot of people. And he came out and he says anyone who supports these organizations, and he says to the IRS that what they're doing is promoting warfare, strife, conflict, and they should be revoked of their status to be able to help people. And the consequence is on the one side you have your religious obligation telling you to do something, and on the other side you have your country telling you that you support terrorism, that you support evil if you go through these actions and support people who are in need. Which brings us to an important topic when we see conflict like this, of our responsibility to vote. When we talk about the concept of voting, it is one of the most important activities that we have in a democracy to ensure that we have representation and that we have the right to enact our faith, our ideology, our beliefs, and our culture in a community. And a government in a democracy is designed to be reflective of the values of the people that live in that democracy. How do we get our government to reflect our values? It's by having a voice and opinion and sharing that opinion and pointing out and voting so that our representation is present in a system of governance. One of the interesting things that happens is that there are people in our community who say, what's the point in voting? How can it make a difference? And the truth of it is that each of our elected officials has a responsibility to the people who vote. So to say that it doesn't make a difference, you can only say that if you're actually not interacting with the organization. Once you start interacting and you start voting in a democracy, it starts becoming reflective. Some people will come forward and say the statement of saying that, well, none of these politicians reflect our opinions and beliefs. There's no one who's a perfect candidate. Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi said it best, and he explained this as well to his community, of making the explanation saying that no one's going to be perfect right now. You have to start somewhere. The idea of cultivating a politician who represents your voice begins by first having a voice. If we don't get involved in the process, it won't ever come to the point that anyone will choose to represent our values. But the same thing, the same way, for example, we talk about creating a garden. When you plant something, it doesn't immediately become exactly what you hoped for. There's a lot of work in that process. The first step is to lay the seed. Once I lay the seed, then I have to nourish it. Then I have to give it resources. Then I have to make sure that no pesticides or no pests affect this. There's no harm that comes to it takes an entire process of progression to eventually get to the fruit that I want. Similarly, in understanding how these democracies operate, is that you have to begin somewhere. And we have to begin with the process of representing a voice. You want to have somebody who represents your values exactly and perfectly? That's great. But it's not going to happen instantaneously. It's going to take a lot of work. And there's a lot of steps to that process, which if we don't begin, it's never going to happen. The first of these steps that we have to take a look at is the process of one voting, being known as a representation, as a community that has a voice, has an opinion, is involved in the process. If I don't like the opinions of the elected officials, how am I involved in the process that that person should take me seriously? If I'm not a voter, they don't care. I didn't put them in office, so they don't care what I think. But if I am a voter, then they have to take into consideration, oh, if I don't keep this voter happy, tomorrow he's going to vote for somebody else. And if he votes for somebody else, I'll lose my seat. Which is why step one is to vote. The second step is to allocate resources towards promoting the candidates that represent my values. And that's going to take wealth. It's going to take financing. It's going to take us committing our time, committing our money, committing all of our resources to that process of promoting the process of candidacy to find the individuals who will speak up for and represent my voice in the system of governance. Beyond that, we have to raise our own candidates from amongst ourselves. How can you expect someone to believe and understand your values if they don't live your values? How can you expect someone to hold your voice true and be honest and sincere for you if they don't believe it already themselves? This is how we find out that if our community really believes in an agenda, we have to take representation within our systems of governance. We have to cultivate our candidates who live with us, who eat with us, who believe this day in and day out, so that tomorrow when they're in a position of authority, they represent our values as their own values. The only way that's going to happen is if we're raising the candidates from our own communities. We're believing in the necessity of having a political process and understanding the democracy and making sure that we have a voice. And then as we go through that process, we'll be able to change our culture and environment. Part of our responsibility, those people right now who are suffering, and they're suffering today, but do you think this is the last time there'll be a conflict? Do you think this is the last instance that we'll have a difficulty and a responsibility to someone overseas who's suffering through difficulty? I don't. But today, for me to be able to better execute help in the future, this is one of the steps that's important for me. You may not see that, for example, the Maraja come out with a statement and give us the instruction that part of your helping the people of Lebanon is to vote. But today, if you're seeing that my government is preventing me from being able to help the people who are in need around the world, and they have a disagreement when I see someone in need who's truly in need and they're stopping me, then I need to make sure that my government understands and reflects my values. And that's going to happen through the obligation of each of us taking the time to register to vote and to vote in these elections. The most important elections that we need to vote in begin with our local elections. And the local elections become critical. Why? Because we have a critical mass of people sitting in this room. We have a group of people that are affecting the local elections, that are affecting these people, that we are a voice that is large enough in this environment that needs to be heard. Take that time. Go and register. Create a community that is involved and has a voice, that it's part of our responsibility to support those in need. And as then we bring a good culture, when people see our values reflected in this community, then we will gain popularity of inviting others to our platform. Others will see the goodness that we've established in this environment and support us to expand this goodness. But you can't invite others if you've never done any work. You can't invite others to support a good process if there's no way for them to get to that means. Today, you may see and believe in the reality of the fact that there are people around the world who are suffering, and they are true, sincere individuals, and they deserve help. But can you invite someone to help them? Can you go to somebody and say that, hey, help me support these people in need? Or will your government prevent you from doing that? And what did we do to change that? Which is why right now there's still time for this election cycle, and this election cycle is a big one for New York. All of the representatives, all 26 representatives from New York are up for election that go to the House of Representatives. All of the state Senate and all of the state representatives are up for election at this point in time. All of our local elections are up and responsible and important as well too. These are important voices that we possess, that we have the right, the ability to influence, and there's no way that they're going to let us help people in need until they know that those people in need are important to us. And you don't have your elected position without us. When we get to that point, then the entire country will assist us in helping the people in need. It won't just be me who comes out and helps someone, but my entire environment who believes and agrees in the goodness of what we want to promote. This is part of our obligation. Right now, we have an obligation to support those people in need by all means necessary, include all means necessary of what's appropriate for our environment and our country and our culture. And part of that is this responsibility to vote, to ensure that our voice is reflected and that our opinions are reflected in our system of governance. Inshallah, we ask Allah by the right of this day, by the right of the Hadirin Ghaib, then, oh Allah, first and foremost, forgive our sins and cover our flaws. Ya Allah, we have gathered here with hajat by the right of Friday, by the right of the Quran, Ahlul Bayt, fulfill our hajat. Ya Allah, there are those amongst our families, our communities that are suffering through sickness and disease. Give shafa'at to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Oh Allah, all those who are suffering through strife and insecurity around the world, give aman and peace to the believers and mu'mineen and all the people who are in every place. Ya Allah, keep our children on the upright path of Islam. Oh Allah, hasten the reappearance of Sahib al-Zaman. Make us and our families from the upright supporters of Sahib al-Zaman. Entitle us to the ziyarat of Imam Hussein in this world and the shafa of Imam Hussein in the hereafter. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna Allah ya'muru bil-adli wal-ihsan وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. صدق الله العلي العظيم.